Welcome, everybody. Good to see so many familiar faces. This is going to be a preaching to the choir night, and that's all right. Um, I am going to try to share as much of my stuff as I can. Um, Bruce, I actually did get my act together, and I did create a PowerPoint.
Look at that.
All right.
I feel good.
Wow.
I really do. So I created it. I'm going to use it.
I knew him when.
Yeah.
So, guys, one of the great pieces of advice that we received talking about preparing for this is to remember the faith part of what we're doing. And so, as a preacher, I was quite happy to hear that I get to talk about faith. So immediately my mind went to several passages of scripture. And I just wanted to kind of reference those here, and you can look those up if you like. You may be familiar with most of these, but for me, these are really foundational as to why I do what I do, what led me in faith and in my study of Scripture to do what I have done. I've been working in nonprofit homeless services for 21 years now here in Atlanta, and I'm only 35 years old, so I started really early. But it's been a faith journey for me. I think it's a faith journey for all of us, and we get to express that in some very specific ways through our faith as part of the Episcopal Church. Um, I come from an evangelical background, and I was recruited real quickly to teach Bible classes. And I know Peter and Panky, you've been part of some of those, and Lee, I know I've seen you in a few. And one of the things that was said jokingly is, that Episcopalians don't know the Bible, and I disagree vehemently. What I've come to learn is there is a real appreciation for Scripture and how Scripture is intertwined to express our lives. And again, I could preach all night there, so I'm gonna move on. But I find in expressing this aspect of my faith and caring for what Matthew 25 calls the least of these throughout Scripture, these three stand out. Isaiah chapter 58 is a passage where Yahweh is talking to Israel because they have chosen to do a fast that's all about showing off how spiritual they can be. And Yahweh says to them, I'm really not interested in your spirituality. I'm interested in what you do. And one of the central pieces of this is Yahweh says to them, this is the kind of fast I want. I want you to share your bread with the hungry, and I want you to take the homeless poor into your house. And it's such a poignant statement to be given to the community of faith that is Israel, that I think speaks volumes to us as to how we can use our house. Now, I do think that at some level this applies individually, but more important, it applies communally. And so what does it say to us as people of faith who want to take action and advocate about creating a house? And for us, that house is Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, in a sense. How do we bring the homeless poor into that house? And how do we create an environment that not only welcomes them, but integrates them into the very fabric and fiber of who we are? And too often they're kind of excluded as this special group we take care of, but are they given the dignity of an integral part of who we are? Because that's how Yahweh sees them. And we're often judged according to Scripture by how that group is integrated into the whole life of the community of faith. So Isaiah 58, incredible passage. And what is promised is if we'll do these things, if we will make the homeless poor part of our community, honor them, treat them with dignity, then our light will rise like the noonday sun, and we'll become the restorers of the breach, or repairers of the breach, restorers of the streets in which to dwell. Meaning our city is healed when we care for those who are in greatest crisis in our city. And I think that speaks a lot to us right now during COVID, speaks a lot to how we respond to the results of the pandemic that affect the homeless disproportionately. And it's something that we have had to look closely at as a network of providers throughout Atlanta. Two other passages, one I've already referenced, Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus gives this kind of test of who those are that are identified with him. And he claims that he was hungry and we gave him something to eat, and thirsty and gave him something to drink, naked and clothed him, sick and in prison and visited him, a stranger or homeless and took him in. And so these things become, again, the very test of who those people are who practice this faith that comes from Christ, this faith that follows Christ, this faith that focuses on Christ. And these are the people who integrate those in greatest need into their community. And then 1 John 3:16 through 18, just kind of, this is one of those just hit you in the head kind of passages, because in modern vernacular, basically, John the elder here says, if you got stuff and you see people without stuff and don't give it to them, you don't love God. That's my Alabama version of it. And you know, that really challenges us, because a lot of times we think about it in terms of the amount of stuff we have, but John does not quantify it that way. He just says, if you have material possession and you see people without it and don't share it, then the love of God's not in you. And so these things kind of, for me, express what I do each day and why I do it each day from out of this faith that I have that's very grounded in Scripture. So very, very quickly, why are we here? More than 3,000 of our Atlanta neighbors, and I use that word a lot intentionally, and from the passage about loving your neighbor as yourself. Our Atlanta neighbors experience homelessness on any given day throughout the year. Over the course of a year, as many as 25,000 may experience some kind of homelessness. And here's a statement that I think it's important to remind ourselves about. There is no one cause or circumstance of homelessness that defines all experiences. And I too often see stereotypical responses or statements about, you know, lumping all of those experiencing homelessness into one category. And that doesn't exist, and we can never respond correctly if we think that that's the case. The responses required are as varied as the many causes and circumstances, but there are universal principles of responding that all individuals or groups, communities of faith, and nonprofits can follow to be more effective. And that's what I'll try to close with a little later on, is these principles that I think that we can apply as we put our faith into action. So Crossroads Community Ministries, most of you guys are very, very familiar with us, but just to give you a glimpse of our mission and vision statement that I think makes some very important points. And so Crossroads Community Ministry seeks to provide access. Access is a big word. One of the things that those experiencing homelessness do not have that really keeps them in this situation of homelessness is access to the things that they need. Access to resources that empower people experiencing homelessness to progress on the road toward economic and personal stability. And Bruce, you said something earlier of, you know, this is not a project we're going to complete, right? And so what we're looking for here is to progress. We want our neighbors to progress. We want our community to progress. We want our parish to progress with the community in this journey toward a more just society, a more equitable society. And so we have to provide access to the same things that we have access to as the privileged folks in society. And then our vision of implementing that seeking to provide access to holistic services, meaning we're thinking about every part of a person's wealth, or every part of a person's health and stability. Holistic services to our neighbors by providing tools and resources that empower them to stabilize and realize opportunities, to secure income and quality housing. I think that's an important qualifier there, quality housing. Each program also seeks to remove the barriers to stability and create a community of support that increases the sustainability of income and housing. One of the things that I often see in mission and vision statements with homeless service providers is the word self-sufficiency. And I don't believe in that word. I don't believe that exists. I don't think any of us are entirely independent and self-sufficient. We are all interconnected, as Dr. King would remind us, and we're very interdependent on one another, on systems and structures. What you see in homelessness is people who don't have access to systems and structures that work for them. They don't have opportunity to benefit from systems and structures that have been created to perpetuate the power and wealth of those who created the systems and structures. So I know we all understand that very acutely and are working very hard to change those systems and structures, and that's why we're here. So why are people homeless? Again, there's many, many more reasons than what I list here, but lack of work, low wages versus high cost of living, lack of affordable housing options or quality affordable housing options, lack of transportation, lack of training and education, lack of access to the financial system. What we've discovered in working with folks that we have recently moved into housing is they don't have access to banking. They're unbanked. They don't participate in the financial system that we take for granted every day. Checking accounts, they don't have debit cards, they don't have savings accounts, they don't invest, they don't use checks. If they get a check, they go to a pawn shop or a check into cash store, and they pay exorbitant interest to get their checks cashed, and then they carry cash around on them, which puts them at great danger and makes it very difficult. They can't establish any kind of financial footprint. They have no credit score. And these things are barriers to participating in a functioning economic system that most of us just naturally progressed into when we moved on from our parents' house. So it's something we have to think about when we're working. We can't just put somebody in a home. We've got to think about every aspect of who they are. Illnesses, physical disability, mental health challenges, incarceration. Was in a great presentation the other day, and this really stood out to me. I think I knew this, but didn't know the exact figures. But a person who is incarcerated just one time is 7 times more likely to be homeless than the average citizen. A person who is incarcerated more than once is 13 times more likely to be homeless. And so we have a broken criminal justice system. We have a prison system that is punitive rather than restorative. And most often when people leave that system, they do not have any kind of support network that allows them to avoid homelessness. And that's where they end up. Unexpected crises and bad decisions with no safety net. I don't know if you're like me, but I made a lot of bad decisions in my 20s, but I didn't end up homeless because of it, because I had a support system in place. And too often, because of generational poverty and other issues, including incarceration, people don't have that support system in place. So we have to figure out, how do we become that Isaiah 58 community that makes a place for those without their own safety net? The pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality has to have no place in our response. So where are we right now? And I think this is really where we wanted to get to with the eviction crisis and how we're responding in the city of Atlanta. And I'm going to butcher this, so Bruce is here to help me get it right. But this is something that we've had an evolution in our response over the past several decades. When I first showed up in the late 90s to the nonprofit service provider community in Atlanta, I was warned by a prominent nonprofit leader to be careful who I talked to, because you didn't want someone else getting the money that you should be getting for your organization. And so cooperation and collaboration were not very popular at the time, but over time we've begun to realize that we work better together and solve issues much better together and create more resource together. And Bruce, did I get the acronym right for HPN? Is it Homeless Provider Network? Was that right?
That'll work. Yeah. Which one is it? It was, way back. There
Well,
was one.
two.
HAG. Yeah, the homeless.
HAG, that's it.
That's right. A group, which was a terrible acronym, but in fact, that's what it was.
Right. So that was my first introduction to Atlanta's homeless service response, and it was informal, and it was informational, but it was informal, and not a lot of momentum always coming out of it. But my hero, Shirley Franklin, tried to help get us on the right path of working together, along with Jack Harden and some others in the early 2000s. And I think that helped to establish a mindset among nonprofits of how we can work with government entities, with churches, and with businesses to have a better response. If we didn't have that in place and we faced a pandemic like we have this past year, I think you would have seen a crisis of exponential proportions compared to where we are today. And to do it with a presidential administration that did not necessarily see the value in that speaks volumes to local communities that were prepared to respond to the pandemic, how it would affect homelessness, not just those who are already homeless, but those who would become at risk of homelessness because of losing their jobs and other issues, and illness and lack of childcare, all of those things that we've found over the last year. And then Atlanta formed its own continuum of care. We used to be lumped in with Fulton County and DeKalb County, and Atlanta couldn't get along with Fulton, and Fulton couldn't get along with DeKalb, and DeKalb couldn't get along with Atlanta. And we lost money because we couldn't get our reports together. And so they divorced about 8 years ago. And Atlanta formed its own continuum of care, and since then been led by Catherine Marchman, a colleague of mine and good friend, and she's done incredible jobs at building that infrastructure in the city of Atlanta, and has had great support from the mayor's office, and has been able to secure an incredible amount of government funding, increased government funding for what we do in Atlanta to respond. As a result, Atlanta saw a decline in the homeless population from 2013 to 2018, year over year. And going back even a little further, significant declines over the last decade because of this collaboration, because of the increased resources, because of a more nuanced approach in responding to the situations of homelessness. And in 2020, our point in time count, which is the count that's taken on one night of the year, once a year, was that there were 3,240 individuals experiencing homelessness on the night of January 23rd, 2020 in the city of Atlanta. This count included those who were sheltered and homeless and those unsheltered and homeless. One of the disturbing things that we did see was an increase in the unsheltered homeless. Some of that had to do with the weather conditions during the point in time count. Others had to do with some changes in the requirements to enter shelters, things like that. But we still have seen, for a metro area or for a city of our size, we've seen a very good response, a very healthy response. And one of the things I think is interesting is there were more beds available on the night of the point in time count than there were individuals experiencing homelessness. So that tells us some good things about capacity, but it also tells us that we have work to do to gain the trust of those experiencing homelessness to enter those programs and to benefit from the programs. There's often a lot of frustration among those experiencing homelessness about the hurdles that they have to jump through in order to have access to what they need to overcome their homelessness. And so now we have that network of nonprofit providers across the board. We have many, many churches like St. Luke's that are very engaged in the process. We have government agencies that more and more are communicative with us, thanks in large part to the Continuum of Care and the Regional Commission and other collaboratives. And then we have the business collaboratives such as Central Atlanta Progress, Atlanta Downtown Improvement District, Midtown, what's the Midtown Association? Anyway, Midtown Assistance or not Midtown Assistance?
Yes,
Anyway, is
Midtown Assistance Center.
no, I mean it's the collaborative of Midtown businesses.
Midtown Alliance.
Midtown Alliance.
Okay.
That's what it is, and they are very engaged and have communicated, reached out to Crossroads, I know, and so as these entities begin to work and communicate more effectively, I think we're going to continue to see trends in the right direction. So before this very last piece, and I'm gonna get through this, I promise, in 8 minutes. Stop there for any questions on that overview, a very, very broad overview. But in any questions or thoughts on that first set of slides there. Good, I did a great job. Any? Nope. All right.
You did a great job, Tony. That's really.
I'll take it. I'll take it. So what's happened since last March? Like every sector, the nonprofit provider sector was caught off guard by the pandemic. Nothing like, we had seen some things like the TB outbreak that occurred a few years back. So we had seen some health crises, but certainly nothing at this level that affected every aspect of society and daily life. And so it took a while for shelter providers and service providers to get safety protocols in place that would allow us to continue to provide services and provide them effectively. Some nonprofit providers were shut down for months and are only now reopening on a limited basis. And so that did early on affect our street homeless population, our unsheltered population, because shelters would not take new clients in until they understood what proper protocols they should put in place. So we struggled for a couple of months, but then through innovation, through communication, through collaboration, began sharing best practices. Shelter beds became open again. We understood how to isolate and how to continue to provide services. Very proud. I always say this when I talk about this publicly. The Crossroads team was amazing in their innovation, and we never closed. We remained open. We cut back to 3 days a week for a little while, but within just a couple of months, we were back open 5 days a week and have remained so. And that's Dominic Hurd and an incredible staff that figured out how to do it and do it safely. And so we never had a staff member who contracted COVID from coming to work at Crossroads. And I think that's quite an accomplishment. So one of the things that occurred is in response to those who were experiencing homelessness who contracted COVID, a recuperative hotel was established for them to be released to rather than having to go back to the street after they had been hospitalized for COVID. It's incredible that the positivity rate for COVID among those experiencing homelessness in Atlanta never rose above 1.5% of the population. We had one of the lowest rates of positive cases of any demographic group with those experiencing homelessness. And I think that's, again, in large part to the collaborative effort, to groups like Mercy Care, who were very communicative with all the providers from the beginning. The Fulton Board of Health did an incredible job in working with us. And so we were able to really keep those cases low. Testing was set up almost immediately. And then as soon as a vaccination was available, Mercy Care began providing vaccinations to those experiencing homelessness and to providers. Of course, we all know the government response through the CARES Act with things like the unemployment supplement. And I won't step on Bruce's presentation too much, but of course the eviction moratoria were very important to helping us stave off a flood of new individuals entering into homelessness, which allowed us to have the time we needed to figure out how to continue providing service to those who are already experiencing homelessness. But then the CARES Act introduced this opportunity that Crossroads had really never had before to provide emergency housing assistance through rent and utility payments on behalf of those affected by COVID. And so in round one, the city of Atlanta received right around $23 million total. That there was about 19 million originally earmarked for direct assistance. When they told us of what we were going to receive for administrative dollars, we said there's no way we can do it with just that little in administrative. So they increased the administrative side of it a little bit to help us to hire the staff we needed. But all in all, in round one, we dispersed 18.2 million to over 7,000 households, or nearly 7,000 households in round one of that assistance, which went through March of this year. And I think I may have a chart I can share here to show you Crossroads' role in this. Let's see. All right, here we go. Everybody see, did that come up, that chart?
It did briefly.
Yeah, it looked good. Yeah, put it back up. It looked good.
It's on its way. My computer is being very, very slow about bringing it up, opening the document. Let me see it. Okay, is it there?
You got it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so this is just a kind of a financial and numerical overview of what we did at Crossroads. So we in total received $1.449 million. We provided rental assistance to 315 households. We provided mortgage assistance, which that was added in a couple of months after the program began. They began to allow us to provide mortgage assistance as well. To 25 households, utility assistance to 239, and other types of assistance to 3. So a total through Crossroads of 408 households and 1.3 million dispersed during round one. We were part of an effort that included 24 different organizations. And so when round two was passed back in January, round two of funding, we were chosen to participate in that as well. And for round two, we will receive we will disperse 1.7 million to hopefully another 450 households. And throughout the city, there'll be a total of 13.7 million dispersed to 4,500 households. One other thing briefly, during all of this, there was additional HUD money made available for a housing effort to assist those who are chronically homeless. And so Partners for Home, the Continuum of Care's oversight body, were able to house 564 chronically homeless or youth homeless households since last November. in that effort, and that effort continues. They're hoping to get to up to 800 unsheltered youth or chronically homeless households in the next couple of months. And then finally, the American Rescue Plan is going to be a third wave coming. We think that there will probably be some type of housing assistance that Crossroads will participate in through 2022. And so we're waiting to hear exactly what that's going to look like. But we know there have already been proposals to increase HUD's budget, and proposals to increase vouchers. As a matter of fact, those vouchers are already on their way, an additional 143 permanent housing vouchers to Atlanta as a result of the American Rescue Plan, and other funding that will help to convert old hotels into transitional and permanent housing. So a lot of silver linings coming out of the pandemic in terms of new infrastructure that will be created because of the increased funding in response to the crisis. We have been able to avert that flood of new homeless through the eviction moratoria and the housing assistance. We have been able to help landlords, which I think it's important to keep in mind that we're not just trying to assist those at risk of homelessness, but to landlords so that we can maintain a healthy housing market, and landlords who are able to work with us as we move forward. And so Crossroads has been busy. That's my report. Any questions?
Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
Tony, what's this stellar presentation? Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. One, I heard you talk about, you challenge the often, become cliched about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Sounds like you would, Justice Clarence Thomas is one who reports that. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, but that's one thing about why you oppose that view. The second thing is, I think we all need, I agree with you, we need support. We don't live in this world alone. We need those resources to help us, but some need more help than others. So I wondered, as you're helping our neighbors get into permanent housing, and you still are providing some support even when you get them in housing, do they ever get to the point where you're not having to supply those resources, where they become more independent?
Yeah.
And what percentage?
Yeah, and that in terms of material support, we do see families. So, and again, every circumstance is different, every response and outcome is different. But we do see many families that are able to get to a point of quote unquote independence in terms of having secured that stable income and stable housing. And so in those terms, get to a place where we're no longer providing the financial assistance or other types of resources. So we do see a lot of success in that. I wish I had better outcome measurements to give you numbers. We're still working on being staffed up to be able to do that like we want to. But we do see that, and we often see those people returning to give back, which is one thing I didn't get to was, how do we respond? But maybe we can do that again some other time. But yes, and I think it's important to understand that while there may be that material or financial independence from a need of direct assistance, there never will be a place where they don't need that support network for them emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, but also in light of the fact that none of us know what tomorrow holds, as it were. And these are still individuals who fell into homelessness because of a lack of the network. And if a support network came along and helped them get out of that support network probably needs to stay in place for the rest of their lives until they can build other networks around them to help avoid collapse and when any kind of crisis comes along. I could say for myself, without my church support network, up until just a few years ago, financially, if something would have happened, I would have been homeless myself as a pastor. And so I can understand fear that might exist for individuals when you may be doing okay right now, but one missed paycheck, two missed paychecks, one large medical bill, one car breaking down, etc., can send all of that off the rails. So I think we have to keep that in place for all of us.
Okay, well, just a really quick follow-up. Would you, and this may be more complex, would you see that one of the factors why they can't move into a more stable situation is the level of income and jobs that would be available for them because of maybe limited education? Or are they just a host of?
Yeah, no, I mean, it again, different for every person in every circumstance. We've assisted people who are on the street who had master's degrees, who were architects, who were engineers.
Wow.
So there were other factors beyond education and training. At the same time, there are individuals who just did not have any type of marketable skill, beyond being able to get service jobs or entry level type jobs. So we have to consider, we have to have skills training programs, but we can't ever say that everybody who's homeless needs skills training. It's being very careful to understand those nuances and to meet with each person. I had this issue last week. We were very excited. I mentioned this in staff, Horace, about this online banking partner that was going to provide free banking, no minimums, no minimum deposit, no, you have access to it on your smartphone. You can deposit cash at Walgreens and free ATM transactions. And it just sounded like, wow, this is great. So we invited them to come and do a day of signing people up. Well, they wanted to have everybody in the room at the same time and make one presentation and show everybody how to do it at one time, and just trust that all 20 people in the room knew how to use their smartphone, understood banking terms, et cetera, et cetera. And so they tried it. And then we spent the next 6 hours talking one-on-one with people who were at various different levels of interaction, engagement with technology. And so through across the board and whatever it is, we like to take that relationship building approach that sees that individual as unique and takes that individual where they are and walks with that individual to where they want to go. And that's part of empowerment is it has to be their goal, their desire. It has to be at their pace. They're the ones who have to determine the journey. The only thing we can do is walk beside them. And so that's what we choose to do. That can be frustrating for us because we might see some potential where we want to start pushing them down the road. But the minute we do that, they trip and fall. And so we have to be very careful not to take away from their dignity as individuals by trying to determine for them what their journey needs to look like. Doesn't mean we don't encourage it. We give advice, we encourage, we counsel, but we can't force. And so I know that was a very long answer, but that's how we have to approach it so that we don't end up stereotyping and categorizing everybody into one lump.
That's great. Very helpful. Thank you.
Lee?
Tony, I have a question. When you were talking about not being banked, which is so frequent, and there are two issues that always come to me. I do think an EBT type card, an ATM type card with the financial benefit on it is more effective, because when you get that check and you go to the pawn shop, and you gotten $1,400. Now you have $1,400 in your pocket, and everybody who wants to rip you off is following you to that pawn shop.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't know how to, many of them, my experience working in the mailroom and all, don't know how to manage that resource, whereas you don't see it so much on that little card. And I'm wondering if the government agencies, the flow through that was on that chart of yours from the Treasury Department to the state or whomever, my experience in working with Crossroads and with some banks and stuff like that is that I don't have a clue what it's like to be living under the bypass with $1,400 in your pocket.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a dangerous situation.
Mhm.
And it really actually sets you back because you have to be more concerned about protecting that $1,400 you got on you than you do about getting out of your situation of homelessness.
Mhm.
And so it becomes just this repetitive cycle of survival, which is part of the situation anyway, of every day, I've got to figure out where I'm going to eat, where I'm going to find shelter, where I'm going to use the bathroom, on and on and on and on. And you never have time to think about anything else but that survival state. And that's more of chronicity within chronic homelessness. And typically that is accompanied by some level of mental health challenge that is then exacerbated by the trauma of homelessness and the other things that come along with it. So it becomes a very complex system or a complex response to help people walk out of each and every single one of those barriers. And it just takes a lot of time. At the same time, we have people who come to us that were just homeless yesterday.
Right,
And
right.
They just had a house yesterday, and now they're in their car, or they're in a motel, or they're staying at a friend's house, but they can't stay for more than a weekend. And so you can't create programs that exclude those individuals, and you have to be very creative in being prepared to respond.
Well, and I see the checks coming through the mailroom, and it breaks my heart because I know some of the recipients from many years, and I know they lack the education and the skills and the coaching to be able to handle a sum of money, especially if you're unbanked. I mean, you've got cash in your pocket and then you're vulnerable.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bruce, I'm sorry for encroaching on your time, brother. I turn it over to you.
That's all right, Tony. I can listen to you a lot because you're the man. Let me throw a PowerPoint up myself, and we'll spend just a few minutes real quickly, if I could get to it. So I'm going to pivot just a little bit from Tony, and this is going to be 10 minutes. This will be real quick, and go a little deeper into a particular aspect as to one big reason why people end up homeless is evictions. And I'm also going to throw it in a little bit of a bigger context of affordable housing and also the social justice aspects. Tony did a great introduction, the scriptures. Mine comes at the end, and thankfully that I've got a different scripture than the three you used, Tony. But I do want to endorse one thing that he said, and it's important to know because I've now been around this stuff for over 30 years. Dan Matthews and Raynell Parkins set me on this path of doing a Habitat for Humanity house for St. Luke's, 1984-85. And I'm so grateful every day. I wake up for that moment when they empowered me to change my career, my life. But Tony had mentioned that the leadership, the resources, the network today is stronger than I've ever seen it. And I think that that's a qualitative statement, that's subjective, but the numbers will back them up. And Tony cited some of those. And that's important because this is such a tough field, as we all know. And yet we've enjoyed some good leadership, and that's important. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about evictions, and we're going to zip through the slides here. There we go. Faith and Advocacy Network, why are we here? Instead of happy hour, it's a good question. But also to echo what Tony said about why he did the work, and I have to pause because, you know, my faith, evictions, affordable housing policy, criminal justice reform, it's all part of the same thing. It's, for me, it's a way of acting out when I read those scriptures that say faith without actions is dead. You know, I feel there's meaning here, and it's a great joy to be able to work in this field like all of you guys feel the same way, I'm sure. It's why we do what we do, and it's one reason you see an odd topic like this on an adult ed program, because it's connected. We're all connected. And also, like Tony, I too have never really liked that self-sufficiency thing. Is as if we can just give you enough job training, enough, you know, on your feet, you can go do it. And it's a bit of a myth. You know, we're all part, we're all part of a whole, and it's a long-term thing. And you can, if you want to go back and get the PowerPoint after this, there are some detail that you might get that you won't get today. And so I'm not going to go into sort of the definitions of evictions and a lot of the detail and statistics, but it is safe to say that evictions are both part of the political economic system, obviously, but there's also a scriptural social justice aspect to it, because it's a system that is tilted against tenants. Georgia's a very landlord-friendly state, and a lot of very low-income people pay tons of, well, over half is what the statistic is of their income on housing. So the deck is stacked against a lot of folks, and when you end up in the downward spiral of evictions, the consequences are just horrific. We can barely imagine it for those of us that haven't faced it. And a lot of the individuals end up on the doorstep of Crossroads or Ansley School, the children at the Ansley School. So that links it certainly to St. Luke's. So here are a few slides about the big picture, sort of the affordable housing as the ecosystem in which evictions and homelessness occurs. And again, don't read the fine print. The current system depends on subsidy is the main point. It's very complicated is another main point. And and it's one reason nonprofits are in it, not too many for-profits. But a couple of terms when we talk about housing for people with very low incomes, permanent supportive housing, and that's one of those, there was a question earlier, that's one of those permanent solutions. You know, folks can move, and the Imperial, by the way, just a block south, that's permanent supportive housing. You can move in there for the rest of your life. If you pay the rent, it's a lower rent, and the services are on site, and it's a terrific solution. It really works, tried and true, been around Atlanta for many, many years now, and that's the holy grail, and it's also the most expensive. That won't surprise you. Tony didn't get quite into the details on what we call rapid rehousing, but the name itself implies what it is. You know, folks fall into homelessness, and you really want to quickly get them out of that and then essentially into a vacant apartment. And I know Crossroads did a lot of that to their great credit. Just rule of thumb, your basic affordable housing 101 says you can't pay more than 30% of your income for housing. That includes utilities. And the second thing, just to remain real quick point, is that the subsidies are targeted by income. And suffice to say that if you read the paper and you're wondering what the Beltline is doing up at 80% of the average income, that is a far cry from the level of income that Crossroads deals with. And it's much more expensive in terms of housing, because housing's expensive to house folks at 30% of the area median income, for example. Again, that can get pretty wonkish pretty quick, but you can grasp the point. Again, I'm going to just zip through this. No reason to sort of pause on what for many of you are obvious. But I do observe that affordable housing and these issues are now front and center In my 35 years, I don't think we've ever seen more public awareness. We don't have enough because we're going to need votes on city council. We're going to need votes at federal level. We're going to need votes everywhere to get more accomplished in the field, but I'm encouraged. You may want to focus on that last bullet point. I'm going to take a couple minutes on that in a second, because earlier I talked about the main way we do affordable housing now is look to the feds for the most part of the state and a little bit to the city for subsidies to close the gap. Well, that is cumbersome. There's not enough subsidy and we'll never make it. But there are a lot of us now that are working on zoning reform as a way to generate and get the private sector into creating more affordable housing. That is smack into NIMBY. And there's your combatants, if you will. I don't want to use that kind of language, but it feels like that sometimes. NIMBY is very, very powerful. It's human nature. But as Tony, the beautiful scripture was that if you have some resources and you don't share, you're not part of God. And you want to try to make that argument in the civic sphere. It's a little more difficult than it is with our fellow churchgoers. But that's what it's about. That's really what it's about. I'll just zip through here. There's a network, Tony alluded to it. These are people I love. I've been working with a lot of these folks on this list for many, many years. They're dedicated. They do really great work. Partners for Home, I'll single out. That's the city's omnibus coordinating agency. It's a nonprofit. Catherine Marchment runs it. Good leadership, and Crossroads is on that list, and a couple of the organizations I helped found is on the list. And that's still a great source of joy for me to continue working with folks that are in the trenches like that. So let's see, a couple more slides we'll bring it in. And I want to linger on this one. And this is like what we can do. These are things that we can do. And I picked 3 of them. And you could, of course, there's probably a list of 100 if we wanted to slice it like that. But, and they range from things that you could actually do yourself. You can join with others. And I wanted to get fairly specific with these. So the first thing, if evictions moves your heart, I would just say, boy, we could use your help to take the lead on, strengthening its state legislative package is probably what we need for strengthening tenants' rights vis-a-vis landlords. Not to say anything about landlords, we're just trying to get the right balance. It's not balanced in Georgia. So that would be really important. Second of all, this may be a little surprising to you, and it's just a wrong that's out there that needs correcting. And per fair housing law, you cannot discriminate on many reasons when people approach you to want housing. But you can say, if somebody approaches you and you're a landlord and I have this rental voucher that'll help me get housing, you can say, no, you can't come into our housing. And that impedes the public sector agencies that have these vouchers for spreading, for enabling low-income households to move into areas of opportunity where, there are jobs nearby, there are services, it's nice, generally a nicer neighborhood, and there's just more opportunities. Well, if landlords can refuse that stymies that very good public policy. And that's on state law, that's on the books. So that would be another thing where we really could use some help. And then finally, let me hover over a little zoning reform. I've spent deep dive the past 8 or 9 months studying it, both the particularities, and it can get quite technical. If you've looked at zoning, it's a dull subject. We might be better off talking about inclusive housing versus exclusive housing. We might be talking about, better off talking about density versus sprawl, because this is how this argument is pitched. And I think it's going to be a very, very important topic in the city. And certainly there are a number of us going to try to make it a topic, for instance, with the mayoral's race and with others. And it's the other thing that is incontrovertible is that there's a direct line that goes back to Atlanta's original zoning laws, or Minneapolis original zoning laws, or pick a city in the country. There's in the South, there's a Jim Crow basis. The 1929 zoning law in Atlanta was the epitome of Jim Crow. And so those ramifications and consequences are with us today. And so to undo that, there's certainly a faith aspect to that, of righting that wrong. So that's almost a sales pitch. It would be wonderful to have people move into one of those three areas. And there's some more particular resources and a pitch for the housing forum. We're going to be talking about zoning reform. And I think when is it? August 4th, and then the mayoral candidates forum. And, you know, God willing, and the creek don't rise or the virus don't spread, we may be there in person at St. Louis. And that would be fun. That would be in October. There's a coalition, YIMBY Atlanta, that I would endorse everybody to join, which is, yes, in my backyard, as you can imagine. So there are a few more resources, and you could hit those links and hope they work. But that is a real, whoops, one more, the most important one. Oops, I'm sorry, that was on the side. That's right. If you can see, I hope you can see the verse from Jeremiah. I want to close with that, and I do want to read it. This piece of scripture is on the plaque at Hope House, which is part of the affordable housing ecology in Atlanta. And we developed it 20 years ago, and 70 units for people that were formerly on the streets. And it's a way out. And it's called Hope House. It's right across from Trinity United Methodist. But on the plaque, on the wall, right next to the door of Hope House, it says, "Seek the welfare of the city and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare, you will find your welfare." And I just thought that was a beautiful statement about how we really are connected. And it wasn't just New Testament, right, Tony? It's Old Testament too. And so that's a quick whirlwind tour. You know, maybe thanks everybody for attending, because I know that Marty started on time and we're going to end on time. But Marty, maybe I'll turn it over to you, or if there's any 1 minute question or final wrap up. But that's eviction in the context of affordable housing. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. That was Tony and Bruce. You're both obviously brilliant and committed and have shared some incredible ideas with us. I do want to get a copy of both of your presentations. If you'll email me those, I can send them out to everyone who was able to join and those who were not able to join us today when I send out the recording of this session. So I didn't see any other questions in the chat. Why do you think, Bruce, the laws in Georgia have been tilted so far in favor of the landlords? Is it just because he who has the money gets to make the laws, or?
I couldn't come up with a better explanation at all, Marty. Absolutely. But I think my sense, though, that may be changing, and that would be encouraging. You know, it's been said we're in a liminal time, that there does seem to be this sense of great change that potentially awaits us. And I certainly hope and pray, and that would be a part of it, Marty, to sort of tilt the balance a little bit. You know, let's be realistic. It's not going to change overnight dramatically, but a little better balance would be a wonderful thing to achieve.
Okay.
Well, I just feel like saying that I'm just so inspired that Bruce and Tony are so resilient. I mean, they have been working in this vineyard for such a long time, and despite the reality of this situation that doesn't get cured, it doesn't get fixed, you just are real hope bringers. And I think that is a quality that we could all emulate. I just so grateful for that.
We know who to look to, Panky.
Right.
Okay, I do have one question I want to pose to you guys from Kim. Isn't there a slant toward protection for the employer versus the employed? And if so, does this affect the homelessness numbers? What do you guys think about that?
We certainly see evidence of that on a daily basis. There don't seem to be always be processes in place in terms of HR processes to protect low income or entry level type workers. And so we do see some of the things that they deal with in terms of childcare, transportation, et cetera, which can create disruptions at work. There's just really no leverage given to workers who are really on that precipice of homelessness. And if the slightest thing goes wrong, my car broke down, I had to take MARTA, I was 30 minutes late. And if that employer wants to fire that employee for that, they can without any questions asked, really. And so there's not those protections like so many other places have. Of course, we despise unions in the South and so many other things that keep wages low and keep employee rights at a minimum. And so that is absolutely an effect that we see walk through the door at Crossroads every day.
And Marty, implicit in that, which is absolutely true, you could flip this on its head, not even talk about housing and talk about income.
Yeah.
You know, so efforts to get the minimum wage up, more protections for low-income workers like Tony was talking to, all of that would have a very good, a salutary effect on, you know, people being able to afford housing, obviously, and maybe not falling into homelessness. So you can approach it in a number of different ways.
Bruce, I'm concerned because I'm picking up that the momentum for the city of Buckhead is they are taking the zoning and just slapping it in people's faces and, you know, playing the, oh God, they're going to take away my yard thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember
we're
the first,
aware of that.
yeah, the first hearing I went to, yeah, for the zoning was probably 5-8 years ago at Northside Methodist here on Northside. And the staff from the city were tone deaf, to put it mildly, in terms of the population that showed up at that hearing. And that scares me sometimes because I think the balkanization we've had of the greater Atlanta area is so stupid and so wasteful that the last thing we want to do is create another Brookhaven or another Sandy Springs. It's just another form of white flight. I don't care if they do have 5 Black people or people of color in it. It's just like the white flight was when schools were desegregated, in my opinion.
Yeah, stay tuned. There's a coalition building. It needs to be messaged very carefully. Different strategies for different parts of the city, and we'll see. And again, you know, I'm comfortable. I'm going to be doing this as long as Panky's doing it, as long as Tony's doing it, and we know it'll be a long haul, and maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but if we can get it in the right direction, tilt the trajectory a little bit relative to zoning in particular. This is how change is made, and my sense is this is time to push. So
well, and I think you're right about that. But one of the things, you know, that I would also observe in listening at some of these civic meetings, if you will, is that well, let me say this differently. It appears to me, I have no evidence, that the leadership for the new city of Buckhead probably don't live by the 3 quotes that Tony gave us or your Jeremiah quote. So they're not concerned, but that is not an issue for them. That was a very prejudiced remark.
There may not be many people really that are behind that. There's some outspoken people, and I know there are other people working very carefully to sort of nip that in the bud. So we'll see. But, you know, this is a perilous time. We need good leadership for the city of Atlanta. You know, all this, of course, was sparked by crime. And frankly, if we show up and we say, let's talk about zoning reform in Buckhead right now, that may not be the smartest thing to do. We'll see. Yeah, stay tuned.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I will thank Tony and Bruce again for all the work that you do and for sharing it with us today. And again, I have to recognize Hanky and her partner in crime, Adelaide Steedley, for putting this Pandemic as Portal group of sessions together. It has been just eye-opening, and we thank you so much for all your work. So thanks for coming, and we'll send you the information out as soon as we get it, okay? Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you, Cal.
Hey, Bruce.